The gunshot cracked across the dusty street like a whip, and for a second, the whole world in Promise Creek just stopped. The chickens stopped scratching. The blacksmith's hammer fell silent. Every eye turned to the general store, where Catherine Turner's father was falling to the ground like a sack of flour. He didn't make a sound. 17-year-old Catherine screamed, a sound that tore from her throat, raw and ragged. She ran to him, skidding to her knees in the dirt as a dark, ugly pool of red began to spread out from under him. His eyes were already looking somewhere else, somewhere far away. The man who'd done it, the man who owned this town, body and soul, Victor Holloway, just stood there. 20 paces away, twin pistols still smoking in his hands. A cruel little smile played on his lips, a look of pure satisfaction that would burn itself into Catherine's memory for the rest of her days. He let the silence hang there for a moment, letting everyone soak in the lesson. "That's what happens," Holloway's voice boomed across the street, "to folks who don't pay their debts, girl." He holstered his weapons with a lazy, practiced motion, turned and walked away. The jingle of his spurs was the only sound in a town that had forgotten how to breathe. That was 6 years ago. 6 long years. The girl who screamed in the dirt was gone. In her place was Kate, a woman of 23 with eyes that held the hardness of forged steel. The morning sun was just creeping over the rooftops as she swept the boardwalk in front of Turner's General Store. She'd kept it alive, barely. 18-hour days and a will that wouldn't break had seen to that. "Morning, Miss Turner," Sheriff Dawson said as he shuffled past, tipping his hat. He always had that look on his face when he saw her, a mix of pity and something that looked a little like awe. Kate just nodded. "Sheriff." She didn't stop sweeping. She had no time for his pity. He was one of them, one of the men who stood and watched her father die, who did nothing, a coward in a tin star. The bell on the store door jingled, and Martha Wilkins, a woman who'd become the closest thing Kate had to a mother, stepped out. "Left the account books on your desk, dear," she said, her voice warm. "And don't you forget the town meeting tonight. It's about the railroad." Kate nodded. "I'll be there." The railroad. It could mean everything. New supplies, new customers, a chance to finally get ahead. But in a town like Promise Creek, a town suffocating under Holloway's thumb, change was a dangerous word. As Martha walked away, Kate's eyes caught a plume of dust on the East Road. A lone rider on a magnificent black stallion, moving with a purpose that made her stop sweeping. Strangers came and went, but this one was different. He rode tall in the saddle, a man who looked like he was carved from the very rock of the mountains he'd left behind. He slowed his horse as he entered the town proper, and Kate couldn't help but stare. He wore trail dust like a second skin, but his clothes were good quality. A gun belt was strapped to his thigh, tied down low, the way a man who expects to use it wears it. As he passed her store, his eyes met hers. They were green. Not a soft green, but a sharp, piercing green, like a shard of broken glass. He tipped his hat, a simple gesture of politeness, and continued on toward the saloon. Kate felt a flush of annoyance at herself for staring and went back to her sweeping. Handsome men were a dime a dozen. They were tumbleweeds just passing through. She had a store to run. She had a ghost to honor. Later that day, the bell above the door chimed again. It was him, the stranger. He stood there, hat in hand, those green eyes taking in every detail of her store. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. His voice was deep with a Texas drawl that was smooth like whiskey. "Need some supplies." "Coffee, flour, salt," he said, walking to the counter. "And jerky, for the trail." He paused. "I'm Quentin Galloway. Folks call me Quinn." "Catherine Turner," she replied, offering a hand. His grip was firm, solid. "Coffee's to your right." As he gathered his things, she watched him. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that was unnerving. He wasn't just a drifter. He was a hunter. But what was he hunting? "Planning on staying long, Mr. Galloway?" she asked, her voice casual. "Depends," he said, setting a bag of coffee on the counter. "Heard the Harper Ranch is hiring." Kate's hand froze over the ledger. Harper's Place. It bordered Holloway's land. "You might want to think twice about that," she said, her voice low. His green eyes narrowed. Why's that? Victor Holloway doesn't like competition. He's not a man you want for an enemy. A flicker of something, anger, recognition, passed over his face. I've heard the name. Then you know to be careful, she said, wrapping his goods. That'll be $2. He placed 3 on the counter. Keep it, he said, and thanks for the warning. His eyes locked with hers again, and for a second, she felt like he could see right through her, right down to the scared 17-year-old girl she kept buried deep inside. As he walked out, she watched him go, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The way he'd reacted to Holloway's name, it wasn't just a warning he'd heard. It was something more, something personal. Quinn Galloway hadn't just stumbled into Promise Creek. He'd come here for a reason, and she had a terrible feeling she was about to find out what it was. The town meeting was a tense affair, held in the church because it was the only place big enough. Kate sat in the back, listening to Mayor Wallace praise Victor Holloway's generous offer to donate land for the new railroad station. Generous. Holloway didn't have a generous bone in his body. His gifts always came with chains. Then the church door creaked open, and Quinn Galloway slipped inside, taking a seat in the very last pew. Kate's heart gave a little jump. He saw her and gave a slight nod. Holloway got up to speak, all charm and false sincerity, talking about progress and prosperity. His eyes swept the room, and for a moment they landed on Kate. A cold, dismissive look that said, I own you. I own this town. And what do you get out of this, Mr. Holloway? Kate's voice cut through the silence. A collective gasp went through the room. No one challenged Holloway, ever. His smile was thin, like a razor slash. Why, Miss Turner, I get the satisfaction of seeing our town grow. Something your father, bless his soul, never quite understood. The jab was meant to hurt, and it did. It was a reminder, a threat. Before she could fire back, another voice spoke up, a deep, calm voice from the back of the church. Seems to me, Quinn Galloway said, rising to his feet, that a decision this big ought to have more than one man's opinion behind it. Every head turned. Holloway stared at him, his eyes like chips of ice. And you are? Quentin Galloway, new in town. Well, Mr. Galloway, Holloway said, his voice dripping with condescension, around here, we value the opinions of folks who've earned the right to have them. Quinn didn't even blink. Where I'm from, an idea is either good or it's not. Doesn't matter who it comes from. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. It was small, but it was there. Holloway's face darkened for a split second before the mask of civility slipped back into place. He'd seen it too, a tiny crack in his perfect wall of fear. The meeting ended, and Kate slipped out, needing air. Miss Turner. It was Quinn. He'd followed her out. May I walk you home? They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the town fading behind them. You shouldn't have done that, she said finally. Holloway doesn't forget. Neither do I, he said, and the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She stopped, turning to face him in the moonlight. What business do you have here, Mr. Galloway? The real business. He looked at her, his green eyes searching her face. Let's just say I've got an old score to settle with Victor Holloway. What kind of score? The kind, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That's 6 years old. 6 years. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. The same 6 years she'd been living in this nightmare. I was on a cattle drive, he went on. By the time I heard, it was too late. Heard what? She asked, though she was already afraid of the answer. My younger brother was here, he said softly. His name was Patrick Galloway. The name. She remembered it. A young cowboy, worked for Harper for a few months. Then he was just gone. The official story was that he'd been caught rustling Holloway's cattle and fled. No one believed it, but no one dared say otherwise. They said he was a thief, she whispered. Quinn's jaw tightened. My brother was no thief. He wrote me, told me Holloway was threatening him, said he'd found proof that Holloway's men were altering brands, stealing from smaller ranchers. He looked away, his voice thick with an old, cold anger. 3 weeks later, he vanished. They never even found a body. A wave of dizziness washed over her. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. If you're here for revenge, she started. I'm here for justice, he cut in, his voice firm, and for the truth. They had reached her store. She unlocked the door but hesitated. Be careful. Holloway owns the sheriff, the mayor. He owns everything. Like he owned your father? He asked, his voice gentle. She stiffened. How did you— Small towns talk, Miss Turner. I'm sorry for your loss. She looked at him, this stranger who carried the same grief she did. Good night, Mr. Galloway, she said, stepping inside. Good night, he replied. And Miss Turner, I was never very good at staying away from trouble. She closed the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Quinn Galloway wasn't just a man seeking justice for his brother. He was a lit match, and he'd just walked into a town made of dry tinder, and she was standing right next to him. The next morning, Kate was stacking tins of peaches when she saw two of Holloway's men loitering across the street. They weren't trying to be subtle. They were watching her. A message. Promise Creek had a new kind of tension in the air. People whispered when Quinn Galloway rode through town on his way to the Harper Ranch. He'd gotten the job. It was a direct challenge to Holloway, and everyone knew it. That evening, just as she was about to lock up, Sheriff Dawson came in. Evening, Kate, he said, his voice trying for friendly and failing. Need a word. She didn't look up from the counter. What is it, Sheriff? This fella, Galloway. I hear you've been seen with him. Her head snapped up. I sold him supplies. Is that a crime now? Dawson sighed, leaning on the counter like an old, tired dog. Look, I knew your father. He was a good man but stubborn. Got himself into trouble he couldn't get out of. I'd hate to see the same happen to you. What trouble is that? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Galloway's been asking questions. About his brother. About things that are best left buried. That ain't healthy in this town. And you, as the law, aren't interested in the answers? His brother was a thief who ran, Dawson said flatly. That's the end of it. Is that what Holloway pays you to say? The sheriff's face went hard. You're on a dangerous path, girl. I'm telling you as a friend. Stay away from Galloway. He won't be here long. The threat was as clear as the glass in her storefront window. Thank you for your concern, Sheriff, she said, her voice dripping ice. He paused at the door. Holloway remembers it was your father who hired Patrick Galloway in the first place, before Harper did. He's starting to wonder if it's a coincidence you and this Quinn fella got so friendly, so fast. Her blood ran cold. After he left, she locked the door, her hands shaking. Her father, he had hired Patrick, just for a few weeks, to help with deliveries. She remembered him, a polite boy with the same piercing green eyes as his brother. 2 months after Patrick vanished, her father was dead. She'd always believed it was the debt, a loan from Holloway to keep the store afloat that he couldn't repay. But what if that was a lie? What if her father's murder wasn't about money at all? What if it was about Patrick Galloway? The next day, Quinn came into the store. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He glanced around, making sure they were alone. I need to ask you something, he said, his voice low. Your father, did he ever mention my brother? She led him to the back room. He hired him for a little while. He said Patrick was a good kid, honest. Quinn nodded. Did he say anything else? After Patrick disappeared? I don't know. He was tense, worried. He spent a lot of time in here, with the books. She looked around the dusty storeroom. I thought it was about money. Harper told me something, Quinn said, his eyes fixed on her. He said your father confronted Holloway, publicly, accused him of being involved in Patrick's disappearance. A week later, your father was dead. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. It was all connected. Her father hadn't died over a debt. He'd died because he'd stood up for a boy who had no one else to stand up for him. He died for the truth. Sheriff Dawson was here last night, she whispered. He warned me away from you. He said you wouldn't be in town long. Quinn's expression turned grim. A threat? Yes. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small room. Kate, I'm not just looking for proof anymore. I'm going to make him pay, for Patrick, and for your father. How? She asked, her voice trembling. He owns this town. Towns can be taken back. He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. The warmth of his touch was a shock. Your father knew that. He was brave. My father's bravery got him killed. And yet you're still here, he said softly. You didn't run. That's a different kind of bravery. The bell on the front door jingled, and they sprang apart like guilty children. It was just Martha. Be careful, Kate whispered as Quinn slipped out the back. He just nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips, and then he was gone. Kate went back to the front of the store, her mind reeling. For 6 years she'd been surviving, just putting one foot in front of the other day after day. But Quinn Galloway had brought more than just questions to Promise Creek. He'd brought the storm with him, and Kate knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was standing directly in its path. The days that followed were a quiet war. Quinn worked at the Harper Ranch, but in his spare time, he was relentless. He talked to everyone, piecing together the last days of his brother's life. Some people talked, whispering behind their hands. Others just shook their heads, their eyes wide with fear. Kate's store became the unspoken center of the resistance. A ranch hand would leave a folded note for Quinn under a sack of flour. An old woman would whisper a name to Kate while buying thread. She was no longer just a shopkeeper. She was part of it now, deep in it. She told herself it was for her father, for his memory, but she knew it was more than that. It was Quinn. It was the way he looked at her, like she was the only other person in the world who understood. It was the shared glances, the brief touches of hands over the counter, the quiet moments in the back room that felt more real than anything she'd known in 6 years. One afternoon, he slipped in the back door, his face alive with an excitement she'd never seen before. I found him, he said, his voice a low, triumphant hum. A witness, a man named Johnson. He was a stable hand for Holloway. He saw it all. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. What did he see? He saw 3 of Holloway's men take Patrick into the hills that night. He heard the gunshot. Quinn's hand was shaking as he pulled a folded, yellowed piece of paper from his pocket. And he had this, a letter Patrick wrote to me. It was never sent. It's all in here, Kate. The altered brands, the dates, the names. It's the proof. Everything I need. What are you going to do? She asked, breathless. I'm riding to Fort Collins. Tonight, I'm taking this to the territorial marshal. We're going to go right over Dawson's head. His eyes were blazing. This is it, Kate. Justice. For both of them. Without thinking, she stepped forward and threw her arms around his neck. He was stiff with surprise for a second, and then his own arms came around her, pulling her close. It was more than just a hug. It was a shared victory, a shared hope. When they pulled apart, the air between them had changed. It was thick, electric. Kate, he said, his voice soft, when this is all done, I was thinking I might stay, if there's a reason to. The implication hung in the air between them. I think, she said, her voice shaky but clear, you might find a reason. A slow smile spread across his face, and it transformed him. The hard edges softened, the hunter's focus replaced by a startling warmth. Good, he said. That's good. The moment was shattered by the sound of heavy boots on the boardwalk outside. The front door swung open with a bang. It was Victor Holloway, and he was not alone. Well, well, Holloway said, his cold eyes taking in the scene. He stood in the doorway to the storeroom, flanked by 2 of his thugs, a cruel sneer on his face. Getting cozy, are we? Quinn moved, subtly placing himself between Kate and the other men. What do you want, Holloway? I've been hearing things, Galloway, Holloway said, his gaze flicking between them. Rumors that you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. My brother's murder is my business, Quinn said, his voice dangerously level. Holloway chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Your brother was a thief who got what he deserved. And your father, he said, turning his cold gaze on Kate, was a fool who died for nothing. My father died for the truth, Kate shot back, her hands clenched into fists. Holloway's smile vanished. There's only one truth in this town, girl, and it's the one I say it is. He took a step into the room, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. I'm giving you both one warning. Drop it. Let the dead stay buried, or I'll bury you right alongside them. He turned and walked out, his men following like shadows. The air in the room felt thick, poisoned by his presence. Kate let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows about Johnson." Quinn's face was grim. "He must have been seen talking to me." He took her hands. His were steady, but hers were trembling. "Kate, you can't stay here tonight. It's not safe. Go to Martha's." She shook her head. "No, this is my home. I'm not letting him run me out of my own home. He's desperate now. That makes him dangerous." "I've been living with his danger for 6 years," she said, finding a strength she didn't know she had. "I'm not running now." He looked at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "All right," he said. "Then I'll stay close. I'll keep watch tonight. I'm not leaving for Fort Collins until I know you're safe." As darkness fell, Kate locked the doors top and bottom and slid a heavy bar across the back entrance. The town was eerily quiet. Too quiet. She sat in her small apartment above the store, a shotgun across her lap, listening to every creak and groan of the old building. Hours passed, then a soft knock on the back door. 3 quick, 2 slow, the signal. She crept down the stairs and slid the bar back. Quinn slipped inside, a ghost in the darkness. "Holloway's men are all at his ranch," he said in a low voice. "Harper's foreman saw them ride out. He's planning something." He hesitated. "Kate, I have to go. Tonight. If I wait until morning, it might be too late." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. If he left, she was alone. But if he stayed... "Go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But what if you don't come back?" He stepped closer, his tall frame blocking the moonlight from the window. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Kate Turner," he said, his voice so soft it was almost a prayer. "I have spent 6 years hunting for this. Now that I've found the truth, and I've found you, nothing on this earth could keep me from coming back." She believed him. With a certainty that shook her to her core, she believed him. His gaze dropped to her lips. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. She didn't. She met him halfway, her eyes closing as their lips touched. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. A promise of a future that, just a few weeks ago, she hadn't dared to dream of. When he pulled away, he touched her cheek one last time. "3 days," he whispered. "I'll be back in 3 days with the marshal." Then he was gone, melting back into the night. Kate barred the door, her fingers tracing the place where his lips had been. For the first time in 6 years, her heart was filled not with fear, but with a fragile, terrifying hope. Hope, she was quickly learning, was the most dangerous thing of all. The next 2 days were agony. Kate ran the store on autopilot, a smile plastered on her face while her stomach churned with anxiety. Holloway's men were back in town, their eyes following her every move. They were waiting, watching. On the evening of the second day, Martha rushed into the store just as Kate was closing. Her face was pale. "Kate," she said, her voice a frantic whisper. "Holloway sent a dozen men out on the Fort Collins road. They're planning an ambush. For Quinn." The world tilted on its axis. "Are you sure?" "My nephew at the livery?" Martha gasped. "He heard them. They're not going to let him reach the marshal, and they're not planning on him coming back. They were going to murder him on the road. And the marshal, too, if he was with him." Kate's mind raced. There was only one way. The telegraph. It was new, only installed last year. The office was closed, but the operator, Sam Elliott, lived right next door. He'd been a friend of her father's. "Thank you, Martha," Kate said, her mind made up. She waited until the streets were dark and empty, then slipped out the back of the store, keeping to the shadows. The saloon was noisy, but the rest of the town was asleep. She was halfway to the telegraph office when a shape stepped out of an alley, blocking her path. Sheriff Dawson. "Evening, Miss Turner," he said, his eyes narrowed. "Bit late for a walk." "Couldn't sleep," she said, her heart pounding. "Is that so?" he drawled. "Because I just got a warrant for the arrest of one Quentin Galloway. Assaulted one of Holloway's men, they say, before he fled town." He patted his chest. "Funny thing, if a person was to, say, send a telegraph message to warn a wanted fugitive, Well, that would make them an accessory to a crime. It was a lie, a trap. He knew. Someone had told him. Before she could even think of a response, another voice cut through the night. Actually, Sheriff, Miss Turner was on her way to assist me. Dr. Reynolds stepped out from the shadows of the building behind her, his medical bag in hand. He was an old, respected man, one of the few people in town Holloway didn't own. Mrs. Peterson's gone into labor, the doctor said smoothly, not missing a beat. I sent for Kate. She's a great help with these things. He gave Kate a look full of meaning. We should hurry, my dear. Dawson looked from the doctor to Kate, his face a mask of suspicion, but he couldn't challenge the doctor. Not publicly. He tipped his hat. Don't let me keep you. As soon as he was gone, Kate turned to the doctor. Thank you, but Mrs. Peterson is sleeping soundly, Reynolds finished with a small smile. I overheard. You need to send a message. His smile faded. Sam Elliott is a good man. I'm his doctor. He'll do what's right. Let's go. They got the message sent. A few simple words. Ambush on road. Return delayed. KT. There was nothing more she could do. Nothing but wait and pray it was enough. The next afternoon, the store door crashed open. It was Dawson, and this time he had 4 of Holloway's men with him. Catherine Turner, he said, his voice cold and official. You're under arrest, aiding a fugitive. That's ridiculous, she said, her voice shaking with rage. Not according to Sam Elliott, Dawson sneered. He was very cooperative once we explained the situation to him. They'd threatened him. Of course they had. Now, are you going to come quietly? They marched her down the main street in handcuffs. She held her head high, ignoring the whispers, the pointed fingers, the frightened faces peeking from behind curtains. She saw Martha in the crowd, her face a mess of tears and horror. Kate gave her a small, tight nod. Be strong. The jail was a single-room stone box with 2 cells. They threw her in one and slammed the barred door shut. The sound echoed with a terrible finality. The circuit judge gets here next week, Dawson said with a cruel grin. I wouldn't count on Mr. Galloway and the marshals showing up to save you. My guess is they've already run into some trouble on the road. He left and she was alone in the suffocating silence. It was over. She had failed. Quinn was riding into a death trap, and she was going to rot in this cell until Holloway decided what to do with her. Hours later, long after dark had fallen, she heard a faint scratching at the jailhouse door. A figure slipped inside, moving through the shadows. Who's there? She whispered. It's me. Martha. She was holding a ring of keys. The deputy has a powerful sweet tooth for my niece's pies, she said, her voice trembling. And an even more powerful weakness for coffee with a little something extra in it to help him sleep. She fumbled with the lock on Kate's cell. Dr. Reynolds has a wagon waiting. He'll take you to Willow Creek. You have to run, Kate. Holloway is going to make an example of you. The key turned. The door creaked open. Kate hesitated. Run? Abandon Quinn? Her thoughts were shattered by a sudden thunder of hoofbeats outside, followed by shouting. A single gunshot ripped through the night. The jailhouse door flew open and Quinn stumbled in, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. Kate, he gasped, his eyes wild with relief. Quinn! She rushed to him as he sagged against the doorframe. You're hurt. Just a graze. We have to go. Now. Holloway's men are everywhere. He looked past her to Martha. The marshal is here. We rode into the ambush, but we were ready for them. It's chaos out there. Martha ran to the window. The whole town's in an uproar. Go, Martha said, pushing them toward the back. My wagon is gone, but Quinn's horse is behind the building. The doctor will find the marshal and tell him what's happening. Now go. They slipped out into the alley. Quinn's stallion, Midnight, was waiting. He swung himself into the saddle, his face tight with pain, and pulled Kate up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. Where are we going? She yelled over the rising chaos from the main street. An old line shack in the hills, he yelled back. We hide till morning, then we end this. He spurred the horse, and they plunged into the darkness, leaving the torchlight and gunshots of Promise Creek behind them. They were fugitives now, running for their lives with the fate of the entire town hanging on their survival. The line shack was a tiny one-room cabin tucked away in a grove of pines, high in the hills overlooking the town. Quinn was barely conscious by the time they got there, swaying in the saddle from blood loss. Kate half carried him inside, laying him on the narrow cot. Using strips torn from her petticoat and whiskey from his saddlebag, she cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze on his arm. It was nasty, but it would heal. "I'm sorry, Kate," he murmured, his face pale in the lantern light. "I never meant to drag you into this." "You didn't drag me," she said softly, her hand brushing the hair back from his forehead. "I walked in with my eyes wide open, just like my father would have." He managed a weak smile. "Your message saved us. We knew they were coming. The marshal and his deputies were ready. We scattered them, but we got separated in the dark." He gripped her hand. "He has warrants, Kate, for everything. Patrick's murder, land fraud, and for the murder of your father." The words hung in the air. For her father. After all this time. Justice. "It's almost over," he whispered, his eyes closing. Exhaustion finally claimed them. They slept huddled together on the small cot for warmth, the shotgun resting against the door. Sometime in the night, Kate woke up. Quinn was shivering, muttering in a feverish sleep. She pulled the thin, dusty blanket tighter around him, her arm holding him close. She listened to the sound of his breathing, a fragile rhythm in the vast, dark silence of the hills. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the terror she'd been holding back. Not for herself, for him. Dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. Quinn's fever had broken, and he was sleeping peacefully. Kate slipped outside to a small stream to fetch fresh water. The world felt clean, new. For a moment, she could almost forget the nightmare they were living in. When she returned, he was awake, trying to sit up. "Easy," she said, helping him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, there was no need for words. They were no longer just allies. They were something more, something forged in secrets and blood, in a shared hope for justice. "The marshal's rendezvous point is at Harper's North Pasture," he said, his voice stronger now. "We need to get there by noon." As they prepared to leave, he caught her hand. "Kate," he said, his voice serious, "when this is over—" "I know," she interrupted softly. He stepped closer, his good hand coming up to cup her face. "Kate Turner," he whispered, his green eyes searching hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you." A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. "Quinn Galloway," she replied, her voice thick but steady. "I think I'm already there." He kissed her then, a deep, searching kiss that sealed the promise they'd made in the dark. It was a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and desperation, but also of a future neither of them had thought possible. They rode out together on midnight, a single silhouette against the rising sun. They were riding toward a final confrontation, toward a justice that had been denied for 6 long years. They were riding to take their town back, or die trying. Harper's North Pasture was a wide, open valley, a sea of green grass under a brilliant blue sky. In the distance, near a creek, they saw them, a group of riders. The marshal, his deputies, and a few of Harper's ranch hands. Relief washed over Kate. They'd made it. They were halfway across the pasture when a movement at the edge of the trees caught her eye. Riders, a dozen of them, pouring out of the woods, fanning out to cut them off. "Holloway's men," Quinn swore, pulling his revolver with his good hand. "Hold on tight." He spurred Midnight into a desperate gallop toward the marshal's men, who had seen the ambush and were now charging forward to meet them. Guns started to crackle on both sides, bullets kicking up puffs of dirt around them. The world dissolved into a chaos of thundering hooves and gun smoke. They were closing the distance, almost there. Kate could see the marshal's face, grim and determined. Then a single shot rang out, louder and sharper than the rest. It came from the trees, from a sniper hidden in the pines. Quinn jerked violently in front of her. A strangled cry ripped from his throat. The revolver fell from his hand. He slumped forward, his full weight pressing her back. "Quinn!" she screamed, her voice lost in the din. "Keep going!" he gasped, his voice a ragged whisper against her ear. Her hands, slick with his blood, fumbled for the reins. She urged midnight on, the last 50 yards an eternity of terror. The marshal's men crashed into Holloway's, and the pasture erupted into a full-blown gunfight. Dr. Reynolds was the first to reach them, helping her ease Quinn from the saddle as the battle raged around them. He'd been shot in the back, just below the shoulder. It was bad. "Holloway," Quinn whispered, his eyes fluttering open, trying to find her face. "He's not with them," the marshal yelled, kneeling beside them. "He's holed up in town. We've got him trapped." Relief flickered across Quinn's face before it was contorted by pain. "Kate!" he breathed, his eyes closing again. "I'm here," she sobbed, clutching his hand. "I'm right here." A wagon appeared, and they loaded him in. As they raced toward Harper's ranch, Kate cradled his head in her lap, whispering to him, begging him to hold on. The gunfight faded behind them, but a new battle had just begun. The fight for Quinn's life. The hours at the Harper ranch were a living hell. Mrs. Harper, a woman with the calm, capable hands of a former war nurse, worked alongside Dr. Reynolds in a desperate surgery on the kitchen table. Kate could only wait, pacing the porch, her prayers a frantic, repeating loop in her mind. Finally, the doctor emerged, his sleeves rolled up, his face etched with exhaustion. "He's strong," he said, his voice heavy. "The bullet missed his heart, but just barely. The next 24 hours will tell the tale." They let her see him. He was pale as a ghost, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. She sat by his bed holding his limp hand, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. She talked to him, telling him about the future they would have, the store they would expand, the quiet life they would build. She told him she loved him, the words she'd been too afraid to say, now her only weapon against the encroaching darkness. Late in the afternoon, she heard riders approaching. It was the marshal and his men. And in the middle of them, his hands bound, his face a mask of bitter defeat, was Victor Holloway. They had him. Justice at long last had come to Promise Creek. But as Kate looked at Quinn, lying so still in the bed, she knew the price of that justice might be everything she had just found. Quinn fought. For 3 days he hovered between life and death, and Kate never left his side. She bathed his feverish brow, forced broth between his lips, and held his hand, willing her own strength into him. On the 4th day he opened his eyes, and he knew who she was. The town of Promise Creek was reborn. With Holloway gone, the cloud of fear that had choked the life out of it for so long finally lifted. The mayor resigned in disgrace. Sheriff Dawson was never seen again. The town council, led by Mr. Harper, began the slow work of rebuilding. They moved Quinn to Kate's apartment above the store. Slowly, day by day, he regained his strength. And as he healed, so did the town. People started smiling again. The sound of laughter returned to the streets. One afternoon, a month later, they were sitting on the bench outside the store. Quinn was still pale, his arm in a sling, but the light was back in his eyes. "Harper offered me the foreman job at his ranch," he said, looking out at the street. "That's wonderful, Quinn," she said, her heart giving a happy little lurch. "It is," he agreed. He turned to her, his expression serious. "But it's not the only reason I'm staying." He reached into his pocket with his good hand and pulled out a small, simple gold ring. Kate's breath caught in her throat. He slid off the bench and knelt before her, right there on the boardwalk, in front of the whole town. "Catherine Turner," he said, his voice clear and strong, "you are the bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I have ever met. You gave me back my past by helping me find justice for my brother. And you gave me a future I never knew I wanted." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she looked down at this man who had walked into her life and changed everything. She looked up and saw the faces of her neighbors, Martha, Dr. Reynolds, the Harpers, all watching, all smiling. This wasn't just her town anymore. It was their town. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Quinn Galloway. 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that was met with cheers and applause from the street. 10 years later, Mayor Catherine Galloway stood at the window of her office, watching her husband Quinn, teaching their 2 children, James and Patricia, How to rope a practice dummy in the town square. Turner and Galloway's Mercantile was now the biggest building on Main Street, a testament to a decade of prosperity. The railroad had come, a symbol of a town that had chosen its own future. Quinn looked up and saw her watching. He smiled that same smile that still made her heart leap, and tipped his hat. On her desk was a photograph of their wedding day. Beside it, another, older photo of two young boys with piercing green eyes, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. Justice hadn't brought back the dead, but it had allowed the living to build something new, something better in their name. The story they told in Promise Creek wasn't about the day a monster was brought to justice. It was about the day a stranger rode into town, a woman found her courage, and together they reminded everyone that even in the darkest of places, hope can take root and bloom. The story of Promise Creek shows that one person's courage can light a fire that saves an entire community. If you were moved by Kate and Quinn's fight for what's right, and you want to hear more stories where the darkness doesn't win, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot more tales to tell.